the weekly show with David J. Maloney. This week, David chats with blues rock artist Steve Hill. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the weekly show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. On tonight's show, we've got a really special guest. With his album Solo Recordings Volume 1, 2, and 3, and with number 2 winning him a Juno Award, he's been an absolute trailblazer in the blues world. His ability to send a wall of sound flying at his audience despite being only a one-man band is legendary and leaves most people with their mouths open wide at what they're witnessing. He's won Guitarist of the Year, Album of the Year, Entertainer of the Year, among many others at the Maple Blues Awards. And his new album, Hangin on a String, brings him once more to the national and international stage with his unique sound and soul. Here, after the break, to chat about it all is none other than guitarist Steve Hill. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Our featured guest tonight is one of the greatest blues guitarists alive. His solo recordings, Volume 1, 2, and 3, shot him to superstardom in the blues genre and introduced us all to a true trailblazer. His one-man band approach has delighted and awed audiences the world over, and he's back again on the national and international stage with his brand new album, Hanging on a String. Here with us tonight to chat about it all is incredible guitarist and recording artist Steve Hill. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be talking to you, Dave. That was quite the introduction.
Well, you're one of the more unique artists I've ever had on the show in that you're doing something so few people ever attempt, that being with the evolution of your one-man band approach. I'm really interested in the journey that led you to that point, and I'd kind of like to start at the beginning. Where did you grow up, and what was life like for you there?
Well, I grew up in a small town in the province of Quebec in Canada, called Three Rivers, Trois-Rivières, which is right in between Montreal and Quebec City. Just a, small industrial town. I started playing guitar when I was 13, and I was playing bars when I was 16. And by the time I was 18, I had moved to Montreal, and I was a professional musician doing like 100 shows a year. And that's what I've been doing ever since. I've put out 13 albums so far. Before I became a one-man band, I was mostly known as a guitar player and a singer. I was a sideman for a while. I've done it with many Canadian artists. And I've put out my first album back in 1997. And I've done blues, I've done rock and roll. I don't really consider myself a blues man or a blues artist. I'm sort of I'm like right in between blues and rock and roll. I define what I do as blues rock. It's really and I'm really into the music of the 60s and 70s, and I think you can hear that in my music. There's a bit of that 80s sound on the new album, 80s rock sound. I love that too. I'm a big fan of Van Halen as much as I'm a fan of B.B. King, Robert Johnson, and Waylon Jennings, and the Grateful Dead, and Miles Davis. And, I love music in general. But the one-man band thing sort of happened by accident. I never thought I'd do that. I was pretty happy as a guitar player and a singer. But back in 2011, I released an album that basically bombed. I was signed to a record label here in Canada that didn't get their grant money. And the way that labels work in Canada is that they get grant money and then they release an album. And so that album tanked because it didn't get any promotion. Mm-hmm. And since then, I've released all my albums on my own label, without grant money. I just, I'm totally independent because of that experience. But that experience gave me the opportunity to start this solo project. What happened is at the time, since, I told you, I started playing clubs when I was 16, I never had a real job, so I don't know how to do anything else. So I had to find a way to make a living, even though the album, what happens if you have an album that bombs and has no promotion, you don't have as many shows. So, and at right around the same time, I became a partner in the studio in Montreal, and I had this huge mortgage every month, so I needed to find a way to make some money. So I decided to do these solo shows in smaller places. And since I had the studio, and the studio that I had bought, I thought that they had clients, but they did not have clients. So the studio was always available, and I lived upstairs. So I'd go downstairs at night and record stuff. And at first, it was really basic. It was just guitar, vocals, and I tap my foot on the floor and I'd put a mic on the floor. And then eventually a friend of mine sold me a bass drum. So I did a few songs with the bass drum. After a while, I figured out, I got this other leg, I might as well use it. So I got a hi-hat. And out of that, like I recorded stuff for a couple of months, and I came up with an album called Solo Recordings Volume 1, which sold more than everything that I had done before and basically since, and it put my career back on the map. And after that, I did Volume 2, and Volume 2 did actually better. It won a Juno Award for a Blues Album of the Year and a bunch of awards. And so, and then I did Volume 3, and eventually, and after that, I did a live album. Then the pandemic hit, so I did an acoustic record because I couldn't tour. Usually I tour with a crew. I'll have a sound man and a backliner. And in Canada, we weren't allowed to have like two people who were not of the same family in the same car. But there would still be shows where you couldn't have as many people, but people still needed to be entertained. So I was used to doing solo shows. I didn't feel like bringing all the stuff because there's a lot of gear involved when I do the one-man band. So I had this solo show, acoustic show. I put out an acoustic record called Desert Trip. And then 2 years ago, I put out an album called Dear Illusion, on which I had a horn section and a band, and I toured with a band, which I hadn't done in 10 years. And now I'm back with a new one-man band record. And I've been touring this record for 2 months now, and it's great. I mean, I love playing with a band, but the one-man band thing is very special. And this album's been getting like a great reception. People really like the songs, and I record everything live in the studio. I don't do overdubs, and I play the drums and the guitar at the same time. So when I get on stage, it's the same. Or
what you see is what you get.
Exactly. And these songs were made to be played live. So it's great to finally be able to play these songs in front of crowds.
Were your parents musically inclined?
No, my mom played piano a little bit, and my dad had a pretty cool record collection. He had classical music, he had disco, he had Kiss, he had Pink Floyd, a bunch of different things. And I got an older brother who like he bought Back in Black when it came out in 1980, and he was listening to the heavier rock and roll stuff, so I was influenced by that too. He had ZZ Top Eliminator, that tape, and I used to borrow it all the time, and turned out to be a big influence on my playing.
Now, obviously you play guitar, and in your one-man band, you've got your hi-hat, you've got your bass, and you've got whatever it is that you have this special connection with the stick at the end of it appears to be a Telecaster. And I'm curious as to who came up with that design. But before I even ask you about that, what was the first instrument you learned on? Was it a guitar, or was it drums, or was it something else?
No, I'm not a drummer. I can't play real drums. But I started on piano. I played piano for a year, and then started learning the guitar. But the one-man band, what I do is I modify the guitars. And I play with my fingers. I don't use a pick. So I'm able to do the bass lines with my thumbs, and the solos and the chords with my other fingers. And I modify my guitars. I add a pickup there under the bigger strings, and I split my signal. So that pickup goes to an octaver pedal, which gives me the range of a bass guitar, and it goes to a bass amp. So the guitar is split, the signal is split in two. And then on the headstock, I have a drumstick there, which has a maraca on the drumstick. And the drumstick hits the cymbal and the hi-hat. And I'm standing up on two pedals, one of them hitting the bass drum and the other one hitting the snare drum.
Now, and I know you mentioned earlier you started playing gigs as a teenager. What did your parents think of the track your life was taking at that point? I mean, were they supportive? Were they like, you got to find a traditional job? What was the mindset
Yeah.
there?
Well, my dad didn't want me to become a musician. Like I had I had good grades until I really got into music, and then everything else just I was not interested in anything else but the guitar as soon as I started playing, and my dad wanted something else for me. And, I can totally understand that. It's not necessarily the job that you want your kid to have, and like there's a lot of, if you're playing bars, and I was playing with older guys, like when I was 18, I joined the Bob Harrison Blues Band. They were all around 40 or 45. Bob Harrison had the reputation of being like the guy who drank the most in like Canadian show business, basically,
And for a Canadian, that's a lot.
Yeah. He drank 24 beers a day and scotch and other things, but they were all very protective of me, like they took care of me and they were really nice to me. And, but like you don't want your kids to, you'd rather have your kids in college than in bars surrounded by dope dealers,
Yeah.
So
How did the opportunity with the Bob Harrison Blues Band come about?
well, I was playing this club in my hometown. I was still living in Three Rivers at the time, and I was playing there every Thursday, and it was a blues club. And I had the Thursday nights, and on weekends they'd have bands from out of town. And back then, I'm talking about like 1993, the Bob Harrison Blues Band was the most popular blues band in Quebec, and they played there a weekend, and the guitar player couldn't make it, and so the guy needed a guitar player, and somebody told him about me, and they tried me, and after the second show, I got the gig. So the weekend after that, I was in Montreal doing 4 shows in a row, and a month later, we were playing the Spectrum, which is 1,000-seater. It was sold out, and my life really changed from that moment, And my dad was a fan of Bob Harrison. Whenever Bob Harrison would come to town, he'd go watch the show. So that's when he realized, I guess, that I might have a chance in this business.
You had suddenly had validation.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people here in the States don't know how popular the blues actually is in Canada. I mean, but the Montreal Blues Festival is like world renowned, and there are
The jazz festival.
There's a lot of blues artists originating in Canada. I mean, why do you think the blues maybe has been so popular in Canada in ways maybe it isn't in other countries outside of the US?
Well, I've toured a lot in Europe and in the UK, and it's very popular there also. In the Netherlands, it's pretty big. In the UK, also in Germany, there's a great blues scene there. And I've played in Norway. I've played in Denmark. They got amazing blues musicians in Denmark. You wouldn't think of it, but it's not in the charts anywhere, but there's an audience for it pretty much everywhere, and good musicians everywhere.
So there's a live music demand for it.
There used to be a lot more places to play. When I started out in Montreal, just on one street, you had 8 blues clubs, and you could make a living, just playing on that street, like two blocks, but now it's different. But like here, I do theaters. I don't play the bars anymore in Quebec. I still do. I still play the bars when I play in Western Canada, but they have a great bar scene there. Like in Calgary, They got some really nice blues venues, Saskatoon too. So there's places to play. You just got to be you just got to love to drive, because
Yeah.
sometimes you got to drive for 8 hours between every cities, So
How did it feel to be working with somebody from Offenbach, which I imagine was a band you were rather familiar with
yeah,
at
well,
that point?
Offenbach. The thing about Offenbach is that they were legends,
Yeah.
and they were the only French Canadian rock band that sounded just as good as American bands. And some of their songs will last forever. So it was. I was already a fan. I was listening to Offenbach records, and then by playing with Bob, who had played drums in Offenbach, I got to play with everybody who played in the band back when they were together, except Jerry Boulet, who had died by then. But I got to play with all the other guys, and I got to hang out with these guys, and it was great for a kid like me, to be surrounded by all these legendary Quebec musicians, and at the same time we were opening for a lot of American bands. Whenever, like the Fabulous Thunderbirds or Albert Collins or Buddy Guy or all the big American blues bands, whenever they'd come to town, I'd be opening for them or backing them up. For a while, like I'd get a lot of calls to back these guys because they'd fly in without a band and we'd bag them. So I played with Hubert Sumlin, one of my heroes, who was Howlin' Wolf's guitar player,
Yeah.
and I got to meet a lot of these guys. So, I dropped out of school to do that, but I was still at school and I was learning a lot. By by being surrounded by all these incredible musicians with experience.
How soon into your professional career did you realize that you may or that you wanted to go solo?
I've always known that I wanted to go solo. I played with Bob for 2.5 years, and then I basically stole the band. But we were already doing shows on the side under my name. We were called the Steve Hill Band, but I had Sam Harrison on drums, Bob's nephew, and he was in Bob's band, and so we decided to leave and start our own band with Mark Deschain on bass, and we did that for a couple of years. And I was doing the booking myself. I was like 21, 22 years old, and we'd do like 200 shows a year. And then at 23, I released my first album, and then 2 years later, the second one, and so I've always known that I wanted to do my things. I don't think I was much of a singer back then on my first couple of records. I knew my way around a guitar. I think I was a really good guitar player at an early age, but I was not a songwriter and a singer yet. That took some time. I think, to me, the first album that I really consider myself being a songwriter and a good singer on is my fourth album, Devil at My Heels, which came out in 2007.
Well, the evolution of your music and style from like solo artist to one-man band and then kind of back to solo artist and then kind of back to one-man band is really incredible. And it's interesting to me how so many of the links in the chain were seemingly either like happy accidents or luck or fate, as some might say.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you kind of walking us through how that evolved, because I think there are a lot of people who didn't, who are catching on to you now, who maybe didn't realize that evolution and those steps. That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thanks to Steve Hill for joining us. Steve will be back again next week for the next part of our interview. So please tune back in. Stay safe, everyone.